Hello, Jessica, and
Hello.
welcome to Hands in the Soil podcast. I'm very excited to have you here with me today. How are you this morning?
I'm doing good. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you for the invitation. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to get in this conversation and just to get to learn more about you and your story and the work that you do with the land that you're stewarding and the space that you are. And I love to get my conversation started with asking people how they got into agriculture because I think there's many people that I've connected to where it wasn't where they started, it kind of is where they ended up. So, could you just share a little bit with us about what was your journey into agriculture and how did you get to this space that you are stewarding the land that you're stewarding today?
Yes, so I think that I've been asked that question quite a few times throughout these years. And there is a time in which my story began at a certain point. And then as I got more intimate with the process of being with the land, I realized that the story actually started way before that. So I'm going to start with that this time. So when I was very young, my family in Mexico originated from Querétaro, and my grandmother migrated to Mexico City. I was born in Mexico City, but I lived with my grandmother. My parents divorced, and then I lived with my grandmother and my mom. And her house, you would walk outside of her house, and her house was like surrounded by what we now call container beds. So she was growing everything all around me all the time. And I used to help her water, and I had an interaction with all of her plantitas since I was a little girl. And then when I was 7, we migrated here. My mother and I migrated to California. And then that kind of just stayed behind, right? And I had a hard time being a child and a teenager here in the States. I missed Mexico a lot. I missed my grandmother a lot. And when I was a teenager, I ran away from home, went back to Mexico City for a year, and was back with my grandma. And I learned about this, well, actually, prior to me running away and the catalyst to me leaving, I found out about a movement down in Mexico called the Zapatistas, the Ejército Zapatista de Liberación Nacional, that rose up in arms on January 1st, 1994. By then, I had this whole history in my family of being the weird child, and I remember having a conversation with my mom out at the beach in Encinitas. We were watching kids playing, and I was sitting with her, and we were having this conversation, this existential crisis conversation. I must have been like 9. And my mom said, I understand everything that you're saying. She says, but you're just one person and you can't make a difference. And she compared me to a grain of sand on the beach. And she said, you're just like this grain of sand, and the world is too big and the problems are too many. And we just have to, work with what we have. And I remember that crushed me at that time, and it moved a lot of things in my young 9-year-old self. And then in 1994, I was 13 years old, and I remember that 1st of January that I woke up to a house that had just had a New Year's Eve celebration, and the TV was on, and I went to get breakfast, and I looked over to the TV, and there was this transmission of what was happening in Mexico. I
Hmm.
remember gravitating to the screen, sitting in front of it, and just watching and crying. And when the transmission ended, my mom she would worry a lot about me because I was this weird person. And I turned around and I told her, I said, I'm not the only grain of sand.
Aw.
And the whole transmission was, this group of indigenous people rising up against the government to defend their rights and bringing on these demands that were for a real existence, an existence where they had dignity and peace and freedom. So I remember hearing that, and it just captivated me so much. And at that point, that day, January, I said I have to go back to Mexico. I have to go join that. And in that idealism of being a teenager, for me it was like, Yes, that's what I'm gonna do with my life. So by February, so a month later, a little bit more than a month later, I had already saved up some money. I had convinced one of my aunts, my dear aunt, I had convinced her that this was not my place and that I wanted to go back home. So she took me to TJ, bought me a plane ticket, and put me on the plane and sent me off. I
Mhm.
joined the Zapatista movement in Mexico City for a year until things got really dangerous for a teenager to be there.
Mhm.
And my family put me on a plane again and took me back and sent me back. Um, that's kind of like where the thread that I can gather of where I'm at now and how I got here. So then I got here and I went back to school, and once again I was in this deep search for who is that person and who am I here and how can I bring them together. Of course, at that time, I didn't know what was happening. School didn't make any sense to me. It was really hard. It was really hard times for me trying to find myself with this super extreme idealism of what I thought and what I wanted the world to be like and what the world was like. I remember when I was in, I think it was 11th grade, we read Brave New World. And I remember reading that book. And in it, it's this dystopian reality way in the future where, for instance, children were not conceived in the womb. They were made in a laboratory,
Mhm.
and it depended on your resources, on your economical social standpoint,
Mhm.
how many months that child was able to be incubated, what kind of nutrition that child would get, and that's the kind of person that would be born. And
Mhm.
then they would be channeled into labors and so on. And within that, there were these outside camps where people would have their children naturally and where people would farm their food because in the book in the society you would take your nourishment through pills
Oh my God.
and those pills would have like the exact minerals and vitamins that that certain population would need to function within their their ways. So I remember reading that book and thinking, holy crap, like if that ever happens, I'm gonna be in one of those camps outside of that dystopian reality, right? So then I remember that part. And then years went by. I got pregnant very young. I got pregnant for the first time when I was 19. I had my first child when I was 20.
Mhm.
She's 25 now. And then 3 years later, I got pregnant again with my son. And my life just kind of went into that space of, well, this is life and this is what you're doing. Until one day I said, no, it isn't, and no, it's not. And I separated my first partner, the father of my two children, and I started looking around to see what my life really wanted to be and taking my life back into my hands. I felt like for that time, I kind of gave up on this idea that life could be different. And that's when one of my mentors from the Zapatista movement kind of showed up again. I forgot to say, during those teenage years, during that time, I did have this mentor. Peter Brown is his name, and he began an organization called Schools for Chiapas, and we would do drives, and we would fundraise, and we would send funds to Chiapas to the Zapatistas for many years. So that's kind of like I was doing that within this whole frustration. So that saved me through a lot, but it still wasn't fully what I wanted. But anyway, so Peter comes back into my life at that time, and he has this corn that he brought from the Zapatista communities because at that time there was a huge movement through Monsanto to
Mhm.
contaminate the corn down in Mexico so that it would all become GMO. So the Zapatistas community started a campaign to find homes for this heirloom seed so that we can preserve it. It was called Madre Semilla en Resistencia.
Mhm.
At that time, this other mentor, Barry Logan, had gained access to land here in Escondido. and they invited me to come and plant this corn. So that was early 2000s. I went to the farm, which became Terra Madre, and I remember arriving there with high heel boots and white jeans, and I had absolutely no idea what I was gonna do, you know. But I remember very well the outfit that I had because when it was time to go into the land, I looked at myself and I was like, what were you thinking? And I went and and you know, I took off my boots, I took off my socks and folded up my jeans and I went into the land and the earth, and I remember feeling the earth on my feet, and it just that process of planting that seed was completely transformative for me. At that time, I had a corporate job. And after that day, I started volunteering every weekend at the farm. It was called La Milpa Orgánica back then. And eventually, you know, had once again that battle. And there's this farm that I go to every weekend, and there's this life that I'm guiding Monday through Friday that are not mixing well. So one year as a single mom with my income tax return, I went and I bought a little trailer, little RV, and it was tiny. I don't even know how many feet, but it was tiny little thing. And I found it on Craigslist. I bought it. I drove it into the farm. I remember driving it in and finding Barry on the side of the road, and I brought down the window and I looked over and I said, "Hey, Barry." I said, "Where can I park?" And he looked at me and he had this thing where he would, whenever he'd get like either frustrated or excited, because it would happen both times, he would say, "Fucking kids, you fucking kids." So he was like, "You fucking kids." And then he just went like this to follow him.
Hmm.
And I followed him and he took me to the forest, the oaks for, and he said, "You can park it in here." So I parked it in there. I quit my job. I took my kids out of daycare and we just moved into the farm. And that became my life up to this day. You know, I never went back. I never looked back. I never said what if at all in any of the ways.
Mm.
It just felt so right. And I felt like the earth was waiting for me. And then you know that took me into whole new understandings on activism, on being a parent, on my mentors, on just every relationship that I ever had after that, which just completely changed.
Mm.
So that's how I got here.
I love that. Yeah, thank you so much for taking us through your journey and these really important moments in your life that you can look back on and kind of recognize like, oh, these were these moments of awakening or transition or just like change. And I'm curious, I want to ask you more about your space now and the place that you're living and the land that you're on. But just in some of those stories you shared, especially that context of the quote of like, what did your mom say again? Like, you are only one grain of
You're
sand. And
just a grain of sand. Yeah, you're just a grain of sand, and you can't make a difference.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm curious, like, how do you relate to that today? And how has that relationship changed? Because you also shared a reflection around, I think I've related this before where it's so easy to feel so small. And it's so easy to feel like what you're doing doesn't make a difference. But that transition of being able to relate to yourself and see yourself as someone who's a part of something so much bigger than you and a part of something so much more, and you're so connected to so many people, like that you're only one grain of sand, but yet you're amongst the whole shore, right? So
Yeah.
I'm curious how you relate to that today and just how that, I'm sure there's so many life experiences that have helped you maybe shift that relationship. But yeah, could you just speak to that a little bit more?
Yes, beautiful question. That's gonna take me to this other realm of things that I love. I feel that it's important for us to understand both sides, right? The microcosm and the macrocosm of what that entails, being that grain of sand. Because I think that the reason why I was such a weird child and a wild teenager is because at the end of the day, I always knew that we have a bigger job to do as human beings, right? I always knew there's something more to life than what I'm being presented with. I remember I was raised Catholic, and I remember going to the church and learning the prayers and having to do my first communion, and I questioned the priest once about the life of saints. And I said, well, I feel because, religion just puts everybody in such a platform, an unreachable platform. And for me, it was very evident that the saints, Jesus, the virgins, they are all there as role models to human beings. Not that we're all saints or virgins or anything, but that they are these role models on how to take your life to its fullest potential, regardless of anything that could happen in between that, right? And if we were to all be able to get there, then this world would be completely different, right? A world full of illuminated beings, but we're also scared of taking it to the biggest consequences of who we are and what we know we're doing here. And we're also afraid of being more than just that grain of sand. So that to begin with, I feel like I I started my life knowing that. I love astrology too. So and I'm a Leo sun. So I feel like that was another sign to me, or this other alignment that just gave me this understanding that we are here as children of the divine and made in the image of the divine in order for us to be able to bridge heaven and earth. I really do feel that that is our mission as human beings. We're upright beings that connect the earth with the heavens. And I believe that's part of our mission. And yet we're here in this world that is just so full of so much, right? We turn on the news if we ever do, or our social media or any source of information, and we can just see how the world is just so crazy. And there's so much out there that can give us so much despair and make us feel like we're that grain of sand in that insignificant way. Yet for me, it's very evident that in order for us to really make a change, we have to start being that grain of sand and making our life what we know it can be, and from there rippling out, right? I was just saying in the equinox, not to take any responsibility away from, you know, anything outside of us. But it is hard for the world to change when we're just asking for changes to be done outside, where
Mm-hmm.
we can't lead a life ourselves that is within the integrity that we're asking for from the outside. Yes, you're just one person, in this world. Understanding that and understanding how that brings you into yourself and the responsibility that you have within that self is really important without it making you feel insignificant. But then understanding that the accumulation of those grains of sand can create, the shore. And I don't remember the word. It's a quantum physics aspect, but it's something about, the fractal images, how they change, kind of like a kaleidoscope, how it changes with the light as the light comes in and out. And this person was talking about it, and they had an image of the shore everywhere, and how the shore is always constantly changing because of the movement of the water with the sand, right? So in that sense, if we're all these grains of sand and we all get to position ourselves in different spaces, then we're constantly changing the line of the shore. So we have, even in our smallness or whatever we want to look at, we have this great power that we just need to realize, that we can work with.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for speaking to that. I love that reflection because I feel like there's a way that people can feel very alone and disconnected, either from themselves or from others around them. There's like an individuation that is important to understand and recognize and like relate to and kind of own. And yet there's another aspect of that where it's not just you, and it's not just about
Exactly.
you. There's this like whether that's your community, it can be found in so many ways, and like friendships in your family and a broader community, or just like kind of understanding those relationships on a bigger scale, and even I think being able to see that beyond just like human relationships, of that relationship to an ecosystem, and what does that mean, and how can you kind of just see that community as beyond even just people, I think can be so important too. And it's something that's helped me, of like being able to connect to land in that way, and like just understand that in a different way. I feel like it's something that not only gives me hope, it like gives me like grace, oh, I feel so relieved that I can be in relationship to this place here. And it's not just like me existing. There's so many of us that are here that can be able to like operate together. And what does that look like? And yeah, so I love that conversation of kind of understanding and being able to reflect and see like, oh, how do I show up? And what does that look like? And how can I really make change or make a difference, and like, how can I own that like I matter here? And what does that mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that that's the second part to that question,
Mm,
which is important to mention, is yes, understanding that you as a grain of sand are very different from all the grains of sand, right?
yeah.
And that if you don't bring up that fullness of yourself, then that contribution to life is lacking.
Mm,
So being able to really understand that you have a uniqueness and that within you there is a gift that the world needs, then you understand that even in this, multitude of people, it is important for me to be here, and what I do and what I say is important because it is a contribution to the whole.
yes. Yes. So beautifully said. Thank you for adding that in too. So important. And so I'm curious if you can give us even more context, because you shared a little bit about the land that you were on, that you first
Hmm.
found, that you came to, and that's where you've been, and that kind of really is what brought you to where you are. Can you share more about what did that originally look like? Was that a farm space? What kind of farm was it? Because I know that you're now in a new space. And I
Hmm.
only know a little bit of the story of that transition from that previous land to where you are now. But yeah, could you just give our listeners a little bit more context into what was that space? What did it look like? And where are you now? And what does that look like?
Yes. So when I started going, it was just transitioning from a flower nursery to the farm that it became. And like I said, that project was headed by Barry Logan, and it was called La Milpa Orgánica. And we had most of the farmers markets in San Diego County. Our biggest supporters were Hillcrest Farmers Market, and it was so much fun to go on Sundays and see our people. We had CSAs. We were supplying a lot of restaurants in San Diego also. And it was just this experiment. Barry would always say, this is an experiment. And we were moving through it as such. We had teamed up with the wolfing program, so we had wolfers come over and stay weeks, months. Barry was a self-declared anarchist, so we didn't really have any type of rules or parameters or boundaries. So it was fun. And like I said, very experimental. And it was beautiful because I got to grow and learn so much there. I remember the first time I got assigned to a job, he gave me this field and we were walking. And for those of you that know Terra Madre, it was right next to the children's playground. And we were walking past it, and he said, so he explained to me this grass, commonly known as crabgrass. And he said, this is crabgrass, and this is going to take, hundreds of years for this to go away, but we're trying to get it out. And I remember when he said that, in my head, I was like, oh no, that's not going to take hundreds of years. I'm getting rid of that. And I sat there, and with my hands, I pulled out so many roots and I made piles and I let them out to dry. It was just like it became this, I have to do this. And I can say that by the time I was out of there, there was no more crabgrass in that area. There was a lot more somewhere else where I hadn't focused, but in that specific area, it was gone. So, and I remember going there and thinking, how am I going to do this? And not even having a notion of any of the tools, of the farm tools that I could use. And like I said, I literally pulled them with my hands every that whole field. And it became a thing because every time I would go and work with that crabgrass year after year, then I would do it in that way. And it became a very beautiful meditation. So that all that to say, I got there without knowing anything. And that land taught me so much. Like I said before, I started living in this trailer and then I moved into the yurt. And then eventually I moved into what used to be Mary's house. So when it was La Milpa Orgánica, it was that. It was very experimental. It was moving along beautifully with a lot of mistakes, with a lot of successes, but it was just trying to figure itself out.
Mm-hmm.
There was a time in which maybe about 5, almost 6 years into it, I got a little burned out of the chaos and honestly being put in situations where I had to kind of bring order into things and get rid of people and start over and then getting huge crowds again. And then Barry coming and saying, Jessica, can you help me out? Because these people don't want to leave. And then me having to be the witch to get rid of people, and it was just this ongoing cycle that I got tired of. And I remember thinking, I'm done. I need to find something different. So I gathered my stuff. I gathered my children. By then I was already with my partner, who is still my partner with David. And we left to Mexico. And it must have not even been 6 months that we went to Mexico. We bought land in Mexico. Beautiful place, 200 mango trees, tamarind trees, guavas, a beautiful river that crossed through the property, but during very hectic times in Mexico.
Mm.
It wasn't the right time for us to go. It wasn't the right place. And within that time, Barry had to let go of the lease of the land. So he called me and he said, Jessica, I'm not going to be able to stay here. He said, I'm returning the lease. I'm returning the land to the owner. He says she's looking for somebody to take on the lease. If you wanted, you should head back. So we did. We head back and we talked to her. By the time we had spoken to her, there was already an ask for the land by Stone Brewing Company. La Milpa had been supplying them for the bistro in Escondido for quite a few years, and we had a very good relationship with Greg, the CEO at that time. So he had this whole romantic idea of saving the farm and he called on for the lease. So when we spoke to the owner, she said, I would love to, but it's already been asked for, but they are looking for farmers. So then we contacted Greg and Steve, the CEO and the president, and they said, yeah, perfect. They said, we want to save the farm. We want to be able to be there, but we don't know what to do with it. We're not farmers. You guys already know the land. You guys know everything. So then we got hired on to manage the farm.
Mm.
So we were with Stone. It became Stone Farms for about almost 5 years. And then that didn't work out because it was a brewery trying to run a farm. They had absolutely no idea. There were times in which they would come out, and I remember very clearly one time that I was fixing an irrigation leak that we had, and it was a Saturday morning. And the lady from HR was there in a meeting that they had. And then she came to me and she said, Jessica, you're not working today. And I said, I know. And she says, but you are working. You're not getting paid. You're not on the clock. You're not scheduled to work, but you're out here.
Mm.
And I said, well, there's an irrigation leak and that can't wait for me to get back on the clock. So little things like that, that just a corporation like that could not understand how a farm worked, that it just didn't work out. And I remember having a meeting with Greg up at this labyrinth that we had made, and we were sitting there with him, and he was like, no, but I really want this to work out. He had beautiful heart, beautiful intentions. And I remember looking at him straight in the eyes and saying, Greg, I got this. Just let it go. I got it. I
Mm.
will keep it and I will save it, and it'll be good, right? And then he said, okay. And there was some equipment that was left behind, well, that they had, the tractor, some beautiful chairs that they had bought. And I remember talking to them about that, and they bundled it all up. They were very, very generous with us. They bundled it all up and sold it to us in exchange for veggies for the first few months.
Oh,
So it
wow.
was this beautiful transition in which I felt how much the land was taking care of us all throughout, since I got there. I always felt like the land had received me in a way in which it understood the growth that I was having there. And it almost felt like she kept graduating me into these different positions and these different responsibilities. So when Stone left, then we received the lease. This was, I think, 10 years ago, 2016. And that's when Terra Madre was born.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had Terra Madre as our baby project that was in a way carrying the history of La Milpa and Stone Farms. So that iteration of the project felt new but old at the same time. It felt like it had these two ancestors, right, that were kind of holding it together and that had done so much work to give to us Terra Madre. Terra Madre felt like this inheritance that was gifted to us and handed to us in such a beautiful way. So when we received it, we started doing a lot of community events and it just became this beautiful platform where I believe a lot of people in San Diego County were able to feel what it feels like to, like what you're saying, being back in a space that says, oh, I'm not alone out in the city. I can be here and have this observance of a relationship with the trees, with the plants, with the birds. There are so many birds there by the time we left, with the butterflies, with the ladybugs, it's just it was a space for us to reconnect. And I remember Barry said something to me way early when I started the project with him. He said, sometimes we don't understand when we are making history until history has been made, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now I look back and I think to myself, when we were doing La Milpa Organica, there were a handful of farms in San Diego County. And
Mm-hmm.
now there's so many. It's one of the biggest counties that has farms
Yeah.
in all the US. And that it just it's amazing to me. And thinking back, at that time, Barry had established this culture of knowing your farmer. He never wanted to get the organic certification. He said, my customers certify me, and that's where I want the certification to come from. And we used to do pizzas every third Saturday of the month. And he just established such a culture around community in that way of having them come and meet your farmer and know where your food is growing. That once Stone was out of the picture, I went back and rescued that aspect that I felt was so important
Mm-hmm.
to that land, not necessarily me, but that land. And like you said, that bigger picture, right? What is bigger than us, in which we just move things around. I remember Barry used to say a lot, I'm just the guy that pays the bills. Whenever people would ask him, he would always say, I'm just the guy that pays the bills. And David and I just went through that situation 2 weekends ago, actually, where we had an event here. And him and I, we could hear the music, we could hear what was happening, and we did go and were part of it, but we were focused on so much out here. And I told them there was a point where we just sat and we were watching the sunset, and I told them, I said, we're just the gardeners here. And it's just so beautiful to be able to be in spaces, where you know that you're doing the work and that there's a bigger plan that's happening. And I feel, going back to Terra Madre, I feel like that's what was happening there all along. And it's just hard to see when you're in the depths of it, right? So I had been dedicating my whole self to that land for 20 years. And there was a moment in which I started getting asked by different people at different times, would you want to buy this land? To me, it had never even been a possibility or a thought that went through my head because I had this relationship with the land that was just very clear to I am in such a beautiful reciprocity with this land. I give her as much as she's giving me. So all
Mm.
of the work, all of the trees that I planted, everything that happened there, I felt like I received back more than what I gave from her directly, from the earth, from the medicine, from the beautiful moments that I had there, from being able to raise my children there, you know? So in that sense, I never felt like I can't do this or I can't do that because it's not my land. Or I wish it was my land in any way. But because I had all these questions, it just started moving things in me. I was like, oh, it would be nice to be able to secure this land for the community. So that's where it came from for me. And I remember writing to the landowner at that time and asking her, would you be willing to sell the land to me at any point? And she came over. She would come every now and then, but every time she would say, "Wow, Jessica, this place is just so amazing. It's just so beautiful." And I would take her to the new places that we had developed, you know, the new little gardens. And she was always very appreciative of them and of the work that we were doing. And she said, when I asked her, she came by and she said, no, I don't think I would ever want to sell it. She said, I feel very attached. And I remember she said something like, irrationally, I'm very irrationally
Mm.
attached to this place. And that was it. I had that conversation. She said no. I was okay with it. And I felt inside of me like, no, this is her land and she's been holding us. She's part of that mother energy that's been holding us for so long, you know, and in that honoring, it's like, no, this will be her land forever. Then maybe 3, almost 4 years after that, she wrote to me and she said, Jessica, I changed my mind. I do want to sell the land. And I began with efforts to buy. The efforts were really, really great. There was a lot of support. That was a beautiful healing moment for me because I saw how the community was coming together and supporting me and holding me in this beautiful way where people that would come and say, you know, we've seen how much dedication you have given not only to the land but to the community, and we want to do what we can in order for you to be able to secure this land. Unfortunately, we weren't able to meet how much she wanted for the land. And one day, you know, she got a full offer. She wrote to me and she said, Jessica, I got a full offer. And you know, I have so many good memories of her and I just want to keep her in that. But this moment and this text that she sent me really did break me because she said, you have 24 hours to come up with $2 million and put them in an escrow account, and the land is yours.
Mm.
Otherwise, I'm going to accept the offer in 24 hours. So that was, I think, the hardest weekend because it was on a Friday when she sent that message. I think it was the hardest weekend I've ever had. It literally broke my heart. I ended up in the ER with
Oh gosh.
167 heart rate. And of course, they ran all the tests possible, and my heart was fine. But I knew it was heartbreak. I knew that's what was happening. And it, you know, I got my prescription. This is the beautiful way that the land worked for me. I got my prescription and to slow down my heart. And I don't take medications unless it's really, really necessary. So, you know, I took them and I took them like in my hand and I had them in my purse. And I have this beautiful, wonderful Ayurvedic doctor friend that I always call. And I told her what my prescription was, and she said, "No, don't mind that." She says, "Go back to your land."
Mm.
She says, "Harvest some lavender and work with lavender." And it, you know, when I would have field trips and I would have walks, I would always stop with the lavender because when it was Stone Farms, one of the beers that we made with Stone, a collaboration we had with Stone was a lavender pale ale. And I
Mm.
remember it was so funny because they were like, oh, we want to do a farm beer. What can we do? And we gave them a bunch of ideas and they really liked the lavender pale ale idea, right? And but they were like, how much lavender can we have next week. And we
Yeah.
were like, no, it doesn't work that way. Lavender does not work that way, or anything, but especially a perennial like that. But we did buy a lot of plants, and we did a whole hedge of lavender. So when I went back, I had all this lavender medicine. But because it was planted with that intention originally, I didn't really have a deep connection with lavender. And because it's in soaps, and because it's in lotions, and because it's just so there, I never really had the time and appreciation, honestly, to really sit with her until this happened. And then I remember arriving from the hospital, sitting with her and observing her, and seeing all her little tiny flowers all around, and thinking, how is this tiny little insignificant, going back to the grain of
Mm-hmm.
sand, this little tiny insignificant flower, how is it helping me to slow down my heart, to bring
Mm-hmm.
it back into balance, to bring it back into peace? So that land just had so much of that, so much of those moments in my life where she showed up as a mother, as a daughter, as a grandmother in so many ways. And when it was time to leave, I carried that grief of that heartbreak for quite a while. I really made sure there was a moment in which we received our 90-day notice, and I counted the days, and the 90th day was August 8th, which is, in this astrological world and everything, it's Lion's Gate. So to me, it had a lot of meaning there too, of okay, once again, I felt like the land was really moving me along to say, you're done here, and it's time for you to move on to somewhere else. And even though there was a lot of pain there too, with that understanding that the land itself had come with the end result of it's time for you to move, because I remember having, and it sounds weird. It's not a disorder. It's just I had these conversations with the land, and I had a Vesica Pisces bed formation in the center of the farm, and I had a chair there, and I would sit there, and during this time I would sit there and I would cry, and I would ask her, why is this happening? And there was that bigger understanding of there's something else out there for you. And David, my partner, he started way against my will, because I was like, no, something's gonna happen, something's gonna change. He started looking for land, and he found this one. We came to look at it. We came to walk, and I remember we parked down below, and we walked the land completely. The house is all the way at the top of the hill. So we walked the land, we imagined, oh, this is where this would be, and this is where this would be. And it was an open house. So once we made it up to the house, the sales agents were here, and they welcomed us, and they were making way for us to come into the house. And we were like, oh, no, 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 we like it. This is it, and we don't need to see the house. And they were like, but you're right here, and the house is open, you can just look into it. And we walked in, and we're like, oh my gosh, such a gorgeous house. And but it's literally the cherry on top of what this place is.
Mm.
One of the things that was already feeling as if Terra Madre was not going to be our forever home was that we were right next to the highway,
Mm.
and the highway was growing and growing and growing. And we could feel, as much as we were trying to cultivate this space, we could feel the traffic. The outside world was just right there, right? Whereas here, we're in complete silence. It feels like we came to a corner of the world. So that's where the change of names came from. And this, I literally, after that one time that I came to see the land, every time I would go back to Terra Madre and we were to come back and do things here, I would always say, we're going to the sanctuary. And the sanctuary became its name, how we knew it, everybody from Terra Madre's community. And then, it was time for us to leave, stayed at Terra Madre Everything had already been moved. I stayed till the last day. I slept outside for the last 4 nights and all by myself. Everybody was already here, and I was there completely alone with the land for 4 days. And it was just such a beautiful closing to that chapter, humongous chapter of my life.
Mm.
And once I was here, there was one thing that I prohibited everybody from saying. Nobody could say, this is so much better. Nobody could say that at all. I was like, nope, you can't say that. I know you're thinking it, but you cannot say it. And I remember going to my grandmother's. I would go to my grandma's once a year. And she had been at that land at Terra Madre. She had planted corn with me. We had walked those gardens many times together. So I have a lot of memories of that place with my grandmother and my family, all my family. But I went to see my grandma in Mexico and I told her, and she said to me, baby girl, she said, the land is the land everywhere you go. And of course, that's something I knew, but receiving it from my grandmother was this point of, yes, you're right. It's just a continuation of, and now you get to have a relationship with the land in this new place. And it just opened up a whole new other relationship that I know it's the same land because we're all in one planet, right? But this land does have a different energy to her. There's this big boulder at the bottom of the property that couldn't be seen because everything was so outgrown and you didn't know that that boulder was there. And I remember walking, just exploring the land and then coming to it and then just, moving the weeds and the leaves. And I was like, what is this? And I moved it and then I said, David, come look at this. And he starts going at it and just clearing it out in this huge boulder. And that space where he cleared out, I just laid on it and I remember just putting my cheek to it and feeling from this huge boulder, I felt this message of like, you've arrived. She
Mm.
felt asleep, she felt like she was in a long slumber. This land felt very protected, but at the same time, like the people that had been here, there's no from the house there's like no steps going down to the land, so it's like they were just here in the house and the land was kind of forgotten. And I feel like she was telling me, I'm here and I know that I know that you know that I'm here and I know that you're here, and now we get to work together. I love to see the sunrise and the sunset. They're two very magical times for me, very potent times for me. And there are moments in which I sit with the sun and I used to picture myself at Terra Madre. I know certain places in on that land that I know what they smell like. I know what they taste like. I can picture myself there right now in these certain little nooks that were just my temple. And it was hard, but I'm creating new ones here. And now the thing here that is a challenge right now in this transitional point is that sometimes it feels so good to just go out there and feel, wow, this is a blank canvas. I always talk about,
Mm.
this, even when I clear a field or a bed, I always think of it as my clear canvas. What are you going to make here? What are you going to co-create with life here? So it feels so good to go out there and see it from that standpoint. It's like this blank canvas. What are we going to do? But there are some other times in which the grief does come in of, oh my gosh, I can't believe we're starting all over again. So there's this beautiful dichotomy dance of understanding the blessing of being of having the ability to start over and carry the experience that we had from Terra Madre. And then understanding, yeah, it's going to be a lot of work again, because you are starting over.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so here we are.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I love how you just share your stories. You have a very like eloquent way of kind of carrying us through your experiences. I enjoy listening to you speak, so I'm sure that everyone else is enjoying listening to you speak as well. But you had mentioned with
Thank you.
Terra Madre when it started, you said it was a flower nursery originally.
Yes, it was a flower nursery.
So was it a conventionally grown
Yes,
space? Yeah, was there any
yes.
process within that transition that was I mean, I know it was new to you at the time, but I feel like that's something that a lot of people don't fully understand of how a space could be transitioned from conventional to regenerative, sustainable, whatever you want to, what term you want to, use for it, but that it's
Hmm.
actually very possible to transition those spaces. What did some of that look like? Was there specific challenges associated with it? Was there kind of like a specific amount of time that you had to wait for? Was there a kind of like a unique approach that was taken in that?
So when we left, we had been there 20 years, and the family that had been there before, which it's really interesting because when we were leaving the farm or we were looking for support actually, we found the family that was working for that nursery for 20 years.
Oh, wow.
So when the old owners, the previous owners from the owner that had leased it to me, they had had the land for 20 years as a nursery, right? And the man had to sell the land, and the farmers that had been there for 20 years had to leave, and they were brokenhearted in the
Mm.
same exact way. So when I was going through it, the son that was at that time a high school student, when he had to leave, contacted me, and we had this beautiful healing moment where the mom, the dad, and the son came over and they held me. I cried, and I remember the dad said, "Let it go. You're gonna be okay. You're gonna see that there's a purpose to this." But anyway, there's a side note of something beautiful that happened within that time. But as far as the transitioning, there had been a few years that the land had not been worked on prior to
Mm.
Barry receiving it. And from, like you said, when I got there, there was no notion of me of what we were doing or anything in that regard. And back then, it's interesting how things move along because back then we weren't working for regenerative in any way. What our thing was sustainability. Back then, the big word was
Yeah.
sustainability, right? And I remember Barry's point was always, we're building soil, we're building soil, we're building soil. So we made a relationship with a mushroom farm that's right behind Terra Madre, and we would get their compost after they had grown the mushrooms. So it was full of mycelium. So after the mushrooms were grown, we would get tons and tons and tons of that, and we would incorporate it into our soil, and that's how we regenerated that soil. One of the things that I feel was kind of like a match in us being at Terra Madre and this transition that had to happen was that even from Barry's point of view, the lack of resources that we had and having to work with what we could was a theme as La Milpa. With Stone, obviously that was a different situation because it was a corporation that had a lot of money. But then once we took on the lease, then we went back to that model of we're working with what we can. The good thing is that we had those good relationships with that mushroom farm, and we continued that. And the relationship was so good that when we had money, we would buy the compost from them, and during the winter, we already knew during the winter they had an accumulation, and they would call us and they would be like, "Hey, we have an accumulation. So we're sending a few truckloads your way." And then we would fill up like
Mm.
full fields. And so they were our partners in building that soil during
Mm.
that time.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah. That piece of like, it was sustainability at one time, and now the word is regenerative. But even within the different words, there could still be such a similar intention and approach to those two things. And that like building soil is kind of that like key point, I feel like, even between those two.
Yes.
But yeah, so I'm curious a little bit more. Could you just tell us about Madre Sanctuary and what is this space now? What does it look like? And also just some context to the land itself. Like, how much are you growing on? Do you have a vision to grow on more? How are you approaching that? What does that look like?
So as part of this learning at Terra Madre and what that gave us to move on to here, one of the things, and Kat and this whole team was part of also the understanding that we needed to be more efficient in our composting because the studies showed that once again San Diego is huge in food waste, right? And when I started hearing these numbers and realizing the amount of work that I was putting into growing food and the amount of work that the land puts into growing our food, right? And everything that gets taken out of there so that we can put it into our cars and take it to the farmers markets or put them in CSA boxes or etc. And then I understand fully, as with all the best and greatest intentions, we go to the farmers markets and we buy all this produce and then we get home and we don't have time to cook and we go out on the weekend and then we come back and everything went bad in the refrigerator. And I started realizing that and I was like, wow, we really need to modify, not just provide organic food for people, but we really need to modify how it is that we are consuming these products, right? And be more mindful. So that's when we cut all the farmers markets and I
Mm,
became super local. And my vision was one, I can't be working the way I've been working. I'm gonna kill myself. I did go through burnout. I did go through adrenal fatigue, all of that was part of my path. And at the same time, when I put that chair in that vesica Pisces, it was my Ayurvedic doctor friend that said, your job now is to find a spot where you're going to go to the farm and you're just going to sit there and you're not going to do anything other than sit there and admire everything
mm,
around you. So when I started doing that, I started connecting with the land and thinking, oh my God, she needs a rest too.
mhm,
She needs just as much rest as I do. So I started resting fields. This one's going to rest this season and so on. So when we came to this land, I looked at it through that lens of we are not here to use maximum space to grow maximum food, honestly, for people that are just going to waste it. I am going to grow food for people that are going to appreciate it. And my goal is for me to feed my neighbors and for the produce that I have here, hopefully at one point to not ever have to get in a car and go anywhere else
mm,
for it to just be able to be here. And we just had a meeting with some friends that are looking to buy land around here. And I was saying, yes, we just need to create all these nooks all around where imagine we have the farm and we're feeding our neighbors and we have another farm feeding its neighbors. So with that said, we are growing about an acre and a half of the land. The land is almost 10 acres. Always, Terra Madre was 20 acres, and I would always say, I just want half. I just want half. So then, I
mm,
got this land, which was just half, and it's perfect. So, in that sense of how much food do we grow? We do have the self-realization men's ashram right next to us. There are next door neighbors. So, they are right now our number one buyers. So just being able to just go next door and deliver is just beautiful and pick up some of the made food because they feed us sometimes too. So we drop off produce and we bring like yummy, yummy Indian food. It's great. And then our neighbors, our loved ones that support us through CSAs. And it's just that right now, that is my focus is let's make sure that our neighbors, our loved ones are fed by the garden and hoping that, that happens all around us instead of we're going to produce and more than anything, going away from this idea of this is a business and farming is a business, which is hard because now we have a mortgage to pay. But decentralizing growing food as a business has been a huge game changer for me. And understanding that the garden is something that we take care of because she feeds us and we can share with our neighbors is basically the approach that we have with it. So Madre Sanctuary then became what Terra Madre was gearing up into, and it's more of this place to come back into focus within ourselves where we can, like you had said, remember that we are another part. And sometimes I don't know, it seems like concepts that are so simple seem to be so far away,
Mm-hmm.
and the simplicity of understanding that human beings are part of nature,
Mm-hmm.
just like an ant is a part of nature, just like a tree is a part of nature, right? A bird, anything. It's simple. Yes, duh, we are part of nature. But to really understand that and really integrate yourself into nature is a process,
Yeah.
especially now, especially with how the world is. And I believe, being able to come in here or in any other place, because once again, I feel like this is rippling out and there's more people that are understanding that it's not just a farm. It could be more than a farm, um, and that its function is not just to grow food, but to reconnect and just being able to go to those spaces and sit down and listen and feel what it feels like to just be there
Mm-hmm.
without any of the distractions outside of that, and go through the anxiety of, oh no, I have to get up or I have to do this or all the things that come into our mind to the point of being able to just sit there and not have any of those thoughts come through and not have any of those feelings come through and really feel like there's nothing more. This is it. So that is essentially what I feel this land is providing us more than anything. And once we are able to hold that, then being able to offer that to the community is the assignment. And one of the biggest ones was that highway and having it so close by. One of my teachers my teacher elder came in and walked around with me and we sat outside and she said, Jessica, I don't think you understand how much your nervous system is gonna thank you for this
Mm.
move. And she said you're gonna realize it a few months from now how your nervous system is gonna react to this silence. And sure enough, I can feel it now. It's life changing and we're still trying to figure out because then there is also the component of, well, people have their lives and they're busy and they're doing their thing. And how do we get them here, right? So right now I'm going through this growth spurt in that sense of I don't need to get anybody anywhere. It's like the whole saying of you
Yeah.
can get the horse to water, but you can't make him drink, right? It's coming to that understanding of you are building what you're building, you are receiving it into your life. And then, when it's time to open up your doors and people are here and then everybody's welcome. But there's no more sense of like, oh, I want everybody because I know when people come, they're like, oh my gosh, I but how did I not know this was here,
Yeah.
But then, the marketing and all of that aspect just takes you so much away from what you're doing that I don't want that to happen. I just really want to be able to just, I was talking to this person the other day that was telling me, oh wow, right here in front of the house, I'm focused a lot here at Terra Madre, I remember I used to walk past the house, past the first field, and all the way to the main farm. And that's where I lived. And I even told David, he does a lot of earth building. And I would always tell him, I want you to just build me my dome right here in the middle of the oaks so that I can just walk out into the garden and walk back into my house and walk out into the garden. And that was my life at Terra Madre. And here I'm at the house and the garden is way down there. So it just feels like there is this movement of energy. And I know, once again, of like I'm starting over again. I know that I'm gonna get this place ready and then I'm gonna move and I'm move and there will be a time in which I'm done. And
Mm.
I've been here for already a year. So I have worked with this land in front of the house already once. And right now I'm at the second cycle and I can see how it's forming and I'm gonna make a pond. I have my oldest daughter gave me a Venus statue and I have the Venus, so that's the Venus garden. And this person was telling me, wow, this time around I can see the vision that you had last year, right? And it just takes these steps and these cycles for things to reveal themselves. But I told this person, I said, yes, but even with the vision that I had, I just work with what's in front of me.
Mm,
And then there's this bigger picture. There's this bigger thing outside of me that says, yeah, this is going to be here and that's going to be here because the land. Oh, and I said that because I said, I was thinking that I want the pond on that side actually, but then I weeded and the basin for the pond is made already. So I was like, but I
mm,
can't do it where I want it. I have to do it where the land wants it, which
yeah.
is right here. So it's just being able to pay attention and not having the distractions of, oh, we're going to create events and we're going to do this and we're going to do that and we're going to invite the community. It gives me the time and space to really listen to the land instead of trying to pay so much attention to that outside noise to just really see what this land wants and where it's taking us.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. I love your connection and how you speak about it and just the ways in which you kind of reflect how we can have a relationship with land and with place, because I think it's something that I think you have to experience yourself to like understand it because it's
Mhm.
so personal, but yet I want more people to understand about, what that means and what that looks like and that that's possible. So I appreciate the ways in which you reflect your relationship and the journey that you've had and how you do show up day in, day out with this space that you have this really beautiful intention to work with and to honor. Yeah, and I'm just grateful to get to speak with you today. And as we just kind of wrap up our conversation, is there anything else that you would like to speak to, or is there anything you would like to leave our listeners with today?
I'll run with that last thing you said. I feel that that relationship is so personal and it comes in my understanding. I've seen how there are people that come in two different ways to approach the land. One is the person that just goes in and says, I'm gonna learn to be with her and I'm gonna learn to work with her. And that kind of just go for it. And oh, actually, I must say three. So the people that just kind of go for it, right? The people that go for it in that same way, but with a lot of respect. So that would be the second group. And then there's a third group that always feels like, oh, but I don't know how to weed. Oh, but I don't know what this plant or that plant is. And I have seen how those people tend to have this wanting, this longing to have that connection, but they always pull themselves back thinking, but I don't know how to.
Mm.
And it's kind of, I've heard this description from yoga instructors of don't wait until you're flexible to come to yoga. It's
Hmm.
kind of like the same thing. It's like don't
Yeah.
wait to have a relationship with the earth to have a relationship to come and have a relationship with the earth. Is just come and just sit with her and just be with her. She's very forgiving, and if you pull a plant that is not a weed, it's gonna be okay.
Hmm.
And and you're gonna learn, she's gonna show up for you in the ways that you need her to show up. I remember thinking one day where I was interviewed too for this one magazine. This is many years ago. And I was asked, or I was given the compliment of like, I love the relationship that you have with the earth. And then when the interviewer left and the whole team left, I remember staying in the garden and thinking, what is my relationship to the earth?
Hmm.
Because sometimes when you see it from outside, you see a certain thing, but then when you're living it, you don't quite articulate what people are perceiving in you. So I sat there in the garden and I thought about it. And I was like, and I didn't have an answer right away. And who knows how long after that, I remember sitting there weeding a bed of carrots and the carrots were babies already. So I pulled one out and I cleaned it with my hand like I usually do. And I ate and I started eating it. And I was just sitting there. And I was in front of the two oaks and at the farm at Terra Madre. And there was a moment there in which I felt how my breathing and the breathing of the oaks was in sync, right? I would exhale and they would breathe in and they would breathe out and I would breathe in. And I had this beautiful moment. And then I looked at the carrot in my hand and I remembered, when I sowed that seed and the many times that I had weeded it already. And now it was a baby carrot and now I was eating it. And all of a sudden, I realized this is the relationship. This is the
Mm,
full 360 full circle relationship of the earth, of how me tending to her, she tends to me. And it's in this beautiful, uncomplicated way in which you're just coexisting, you know? And I think that in order for us to be able to get to that, you have to be able to just sit and be with the land, with the earth, with the plants, with the flowers, with the seeds, and just allow them to impregnate into you that reality of we are just coexisting together, you know? So that's what we do.
mm.
That's what we're gonna do.
Yes, yes, I love that. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for just sharing your story and sharing your time with us today and sharing more about who you are and what you do. It's been so beautiful to get to speak with you and connect. And I look forward to getting to follow you more on your journey with Madre Sanctuary as well and come and see the space. I haven't been out there yet, so I would love to see the space
Beautiful.
when you open it up and are ready to bring people onto the site.
Beautiful. Yes, we were going to be ready to welcome you and walk you around and just share more. So thank you so much for the invite, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.